Okay, so welcome to Sound with our new live streaming going on ahead. My name is Joshua McCrae, and I'm going to be recording the Count of Monte Cristo over the next couple of months, and I'm going to try and do it live. Right now, we're about 20 hours into a 54-hour audiobook, so we're starting actually at chapter 34 called the Colosseum, and you get to watch how a audiobook narrator works in real time. Hopefully, I'll be doing this for the next couple of months, a couple of days a week when I'm not working on other audiobooks. And if you got any questions or want to know stuff, feel free to jump in the chat. While I'm working, I'm not going to be obviously checking the chat, but I will check it once I finish with the recording for today, and then so stick around. And if you don't want to stick around, just go ahead and send me an email or direct message or whatever it is we do here. We'll make this a lot more professional coming up, so this is kind of our first time doing YouTube videos. So we're going to start over here at chapter 34 with the Colosseum. And if you're wondering why I didn't start with chapter 1, it's because I just had this idea recently, and I started doing it on Twitch. And that didn't quite work out. I'm just not cute enough. Although the cherry chapstick has a huge effect. So, now that we've got ourselves hydrated, and we've got our script in front of us, and we've got our Logic recording session just about ready to go, we are going to start. So, hold on to your hats. Here we go. Back to the beginning, and yeah. Chapter 34, The Colosseum. Franz had so managed his route that during the ride to the Colosseum they passed not a single ancient ruin, so that no preliminary impression interfered to mitigate the colossal proportions of the gigantic building they came to admire. The road selected was a continuation of the Via Sistina. Then, by cutting off the right angle of the street in which stands Santa Maria Maggiore, and by preceding the Via Urbana, the travelers would find themselves directly opposite the Colosseum. This itinerary possessed another great advantage, that of leaving Franz at full liberty to indulge his deep reverie upon the subject of Signor Pastrini's story, in which his mysterious host of Monte Cristo was so strangely mixed up. Seated with folded arms. So what we do is we trim off the mistake, put our track in live, and you're going to hear a little bit of the muffled talking, but I'm going to hear it much better because I have better speakers than you do. Here we go. His host of Monte Cristo was so strangely mixed up. Seated with folded arms in a corner of the carriage, he continued to ponder over the singular story he had so lately listened to, and to ask himself an interminable number of questions touching its various circumstances, without, however, arriving at a satisfactory reply to any of them. One fact more than the... What I was trying to do is scroll the text, and instead I scrolled the audio track. So, let's try this again. Satisfactory reply to any of them. One fact more than the rest brought his friend Sinbad the Sailor back to his recollection, and that was the mysterious sort of intimacy that seemed to exist between the brigands and the sailors, and Pastrini's account of having found refuge on board the vessels of smugglers and fishermen. It reminded Franz of the two Corsican bandits he had found supping so amicably with the crew of the little yacht, which had even deviated from its course, oh yeah. Nope, sometimes you just slip up. Okay, so we got a big old breath right in there. I don't know if I want to keep it, though. Okay, so we're going to go there. We do still have a big breath, but it's not quite as stabbing. So we're going to go all the way over here. It reminded. I'm going to take a little glass of water. Always stay hydrated, folks. Found refuge on board the vessels of smugglers and fishermen. It reminded Franz of the two Corsican bandits he had found supping so amicably with the crew of the little yacht, which had even deviated from its course and touched at Porto Vecchio for the sole purpose of landing them. The very name assumed by his host of Monte Cristo, and again repeated by the landlord of the Hotel de Londres, abundantly proved to him that his island friend was playing his philanthropic part on the shores of Piombino, Civitavecchia, Ostia, and Gaeta, as on those of Corsica, Tuscany, and Spain. And further, Franz bethought him of having heard his singular entertainer speak of both Tunis and Palermo, proving thereby how largely his circle of acquaintances extended. That was quite the mouthful, which is fine. That's what we deal with, quite the mouthful, but we do want to clean up this transition, make sure it sounds right.
Smugglers and fishermen. It reminded Franz.
Okay, so we need to pump that. Pump you. We're just cleaning up the transition between the two tracks.
Of smugglers and fishermen. It reminded Franz of the two Corsican.
Need a little bit more breath there.
Smugglers and fishermen. It reminded Franz of
perfect timing. Okay.
Acquaintances extended.
Excellent. We're hurrying a little bit because there is so much exposition and there's so many long sentences. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and slow down just a skosh so that we bring you back into the story.
His circle of acquaintances extended.
But however the mind of the young man might be absorbed in these reflections, they were at once dispersed at the sight of the dark, frowning ruins of the... Clearly, we are having trouble putting words into sentences today, so let's... maybe we didn't warm up quite hard. We went for a nice mild jog, but sometimes it just doesn't get the face muscles all rocking. Okay, here we go.
His circle of acquaintances extended.
But however the mind of the young man might be absorbed in these reflections, they were at once dispersed at the sight of the dark, frowning ruins of the stupendous Colosseum. All right, we're going to try that all again because we can.
His circle of acquaintances extended.
But however the mind of the young man might be absorbed in these reflections, they were at once dispersed at the sight of the dark, frowning ruins of the stupendous Colosseum, through the various openings of which the pale moonlight played and flickered like the unearthly gleam from the eyes of the wandering dead. What a great line. Flicker like the gleam of the eyes of the wandering dead. This is why we work on classics. Not that I don't love all the books I work on, but a line like that? Come on, man.
From the eyes of the wandering dead.
The carriage stopped near the Meta-Sudans. The door was opened, and the young men eagerly alighting found themselves opposite a guide who appeared to have sprung up from the ground, so unexpected was his appearance. The usual guide from the hotel having followed them, they had paid 2 conductors. The usual guide from the... Nor is it possible at Rome to avoid this abundant supply of guides.
Was his appearance.
There's something unwieldy about that sentence, so we're just going to go through it real quick. The usual guide from the hotel having followed them, they had paid 2 conductors. Nor is it possible at Rome to avoid this abundant supply of guides. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, it's just a little archaic language. I could go in and fix it, but I'm not going to do that today. We're just going to kind of barrel through, so it just has a certain sense of guides are plentiful in the Colosseum. Here we go.
Sprung up from the ground, so unexpected was his appearance.
And of course we have to burp right as we hit record. Excuse us. All right.
Sprung up from the ground, so unexpected was his appearance.
The usual guide from the hotel having followed them, they had paid 2 conductors. Nor is it possible at Rome to avoid this abundant supply of guides. Besides, the ordinary guide, who seizes upon you directly, seizes upon you the moment you set foot into your hotel. We're going to actually change that because that doesn't make any sense.
Supply of guides. Besides, the abundant supply of guides. Besides,
the ordinary guide, who seizes upon you the second you set foot in your hotel and never quits you while you remain in the city. There's also a special guide belonging to each monument, nay, almost to each part of a monument. It may therefore be easily imagined there is no scarcity of guides at the Colosseum, that wonder of all ages. Ooh, wonder of all ages. That wonder of all ages. Let's try that again.
Colosseum, that
No, we're going to go back. I'm going to start that again.
of a monument. It made their
Here we go. Boop-a-doo.
to each part of a monument.
It may therefore be easily imagined there is no scarcity of guides at the Colosseum, that wonder of all ages which Martial thus eulogizes. Let Memphis cease to boast the barbarous miracles of her pyramids, and the wonders of Babylon be talked of no more among us. All must bow to the superiority of the gigantic labor of the Caesars, and the many voices of fame spread far and wide the surpassing merits of this incomparable monument. As for Albert and Franz, they essayed not to escape from their Citronian tyrants, and indeed it would have been so much more difficult to break their bondage, as the guides alone are permitted to visit these monuments with torches in their hands. Thus, then, the young men made no attempt at resistance, but blindly and confidently surrendered themselves into the care and custody of their conductors. Franz had already made seven is the word we were looking for. Okay, so we had this big bombastic opening. We're going to bring it down now. And then hopefully we can record longer times without screwing up. Messing up is what I said.
Care and custody of their conductors.
Franz had already made 7 or 8 similar excursions to the Colosseum, while his less favored companion trod for the first time in his life the classic ground forming the monument of Flavius Vespasian, and, to his credit be spoken, his mind, even amid the glib loquacity of the guides, was duly and deeply touched with awe and enthusiastic admiration of all he saw. Enthusiastic admiration of all he saw.
His mind, even amid the glib loquacity of the guides, was duly.
Let's chew that language just a little bit. Just a little bit. Chew that language just a little bit. Admiration, his mind, even amid the loquacity of the guides. We're starting here.
His mind, even amid the glib loquacity of the guides,
was duly and deeply touched with awe and enthusiastic admiration of all he saw. And certainly no adequate notion of these stupendous ruins can be formed, save by such as has visited them, and more especially by moonlight, at which time the vast proportions of the building appear twice as large when viewed by the mysterious beams of a southern moonlit sky, whose rays are sufficiently clear and vivid to light the horizon with a glow equal to the soft twilight of a western clime. Scarcely, therefore, had the reflective Franz walked 100 steps beneath... Ooh, we need that. We ran out of breath mid-sentence, and like they say, narrating is breathing.
equal to the soft twilight of a western clime.
Scarcely, therefore, had the reflective Franz walked 100 steps beneath the interior porticos of the ruin, when abandoning Albert to the guides, who would by no means yield their prescriptive light, I had some goodness, but we are dehydrating, I can tell. Stuff is just dripping off us.
The porticos of the ruin, when abandoning Albert to the guides, who
We're going to have to start that again.
equal to the soft twilight of a western clime.
Scarcely, therefore, had the reflective Franz walked 100 steps beneath the interior porticos of the ruin, when, abandoning Albert to the guides, who would by no means yield their prescriptive right of carrying their victims through the routine regularly laid down, and as regularly followed by them, but dragged the unconscious visitor to the various objects with a pertinacity that admitted of no appeal, beginning as a matter of course with the lion's den, the hall of the gladiators, and finishing with Caesar's podium, to escape a jargon and mechanical survey of the wonders by which he was surrounded. Franz ascended a half-dilapidated staircase, and leaving them to follow the monotonous round, seated himself at the foot of a column, and immediately opposite a large aperture which permitted him to enjoy a full and undisturbed view of the gigantic dimensions of the majestic ruin. Franz had remained for nearly a quarter of an hour, perfectly hidden by the shadow of the vast column at whose base he had found a resting place, and from whence his eyes followed the motions of Albert and his guides, who, holding their torches in their hands, had emerged from a vomitorium at the opposite extremity of the Colosseum, and then again disappeared down the steps, conducting to the seats reserved for the Vestal virgins, resembling, as they glided along, some restless shades following the flickering glare of so many ignis asphalti. Ew, I wonder what that is.
They glided along, some restless
I don't... we'll leave it.
shades following the flickering glare of so many ignis asphalti.
Okay, that's cool. We're walking it. We're working it good. Okay.
So many ignis asphalti.
All at once his ear caught a sound resembling that of a stone rolling down the staircase opposite feeling a little stuck.
So many ignis asphalti.
All at once his ear caught a sound resembling that of a stone rolling down the staircase opposite
So many ignis asphalti.
All at once his ear caught a sound resembling that of a stone rolling down the staircase opposite the one by which he had himself ascended. There was nothing remarkable in the circumstance of a fragment of granite giving way and falling heavily below. Opposite
the one by which he had himself ascended.
There was nothing remarkable in the circumstance of a fragment of granite giving way and falling heavily below, but it seemed to him that the substance that fell gave way. So one of the problems with working with Victoria-era writing is, one, it's both beautiful and very complex. So there's a lot of complicated sentences, and you find yourself tripping over it a little bit, which is why doing 54 hours of this stuff can seem a little daunting, which is why I have you with me. Here we go.
Fragment of granite, giving way and falling heavily below.
But it seemed to him that the substance that fell gave way beneath the pressure of a foot, and also that someone who endeavored as much as possible to prevent his... Darn it. I was going to say something other that starts with an F, not footsteps.
Of a foot.
All right.
Substance that fell gave way beneath the pressure of a foot.
And also that... Sorry, there was mouth noise. Here we go. And also that someone who endeavored as much as possible to prevent his footsteps from being heard was approaching the spot where he sat. Conjecture soon became certainty, for the figure of a man was distinctly visible to Franz, gradually emerging from the staircase opposite.
Franz gradually was approaching the spot where he sat.
Conjecture soon became certainty, for the figure of a man was distinctly visible to Franz, gradually emerging from the staircase opposite, upon which the moon was at that moment pouring a full tide of silvery brightness. The stranger thus presenting himself was probably a person who, like Franz, preferred the enjoyment of solitude and his own thoughts. It needs to go a little faster. You are Captain Kirking that one.
Who, like Franz,
Yeah, let's try that again. Do. It's got a cadence to it, and if you mess up the cadence, it just...
pouring a full tide of silvery brightness.
The stranger thus presenting himself was probably a person who, like Franz, preferred the enjoyment of solitude and his own thoughts to the frivolous gabble of the guides, and his appearance had nothing extraordinary in it, but the hesitation with which he proceeded, stopping and listening, with anxious attention at every step he took, convinced Franz that he had expected the Okay, we got a little breath there, but we're going to keep that little breath. We like that little breath.
And listening with anxious attention at every step he took.
It convinced Franz that he expected the arrival of some person. It convinced Franz that he expected the arrival of some person. By a sort of instinctive impulse, Franz withdrew as much as possible behind his pillar. About 10 feet from the spot where he and the stranger were. What's narrating underwater? Okay.
As much as possible behind his pillar.
About 10 feet from the spot where he and the stranger were, the roof had given way, leaving a large round opening through which might be seen the blue vault of heaven, thickly studded with stars. Around this opening, which had possibly for ages permitted a free entrance to the brilliant moonbeams that now illuminated the vast pile, grew a quantity of creeping plants, whose delicate green branches stood out in bold relief against the clear azure of the firmament, while large masses of thick, strong, fibrous shoots forced their way through the chasm and hung floating to and fro like so many waving strings. The person whose mysterious arrival had attracted the attention of Franz stood in a kind of half-light that rendered it impossible to distinguish his features, although his dress was easily made out. He wore a large brown mantle, one fold of which, thrown over his left shoulder, I love it when you get in the groove.
Although his dress was easily made out.
He wore a large brown mantle, one fold of which, thrown over his left shoulder, served likewise to mask the lower part of his countenance, while the upper part was completely hidden by his broad-brimmed hat. The lower part of his dress was more distinctly visible by the bright rays of the moon, which, entering through the broken ceiling, shed their refulgent beams on feet. Refulgent? I'm going to skip the word refulgent.
Entering through the broken ceiling. Shed.
We like that breath there, though. We're going to keep that breath. Breathing is good. Breathing is good. Okay, here we go. Ba-doo-ba-doo. And we're cutting refulgent. Refulgent. We don't even know what that means.
Rays of the moon, which, entering through the broken ceiling.
Shed their beams on feet cased in elegantly made boots of polished leather, over which descended fashionably cut trousers of black cloth. From the imperfect means Franz had of judging, he could only come to one conclusion, that the person he was thus watching certainly belonged to no inferior station of life. Some few minutes had elapsed, and the stranger began to show manifest signs of impatience, when a slight noise was heard outside the aperture in the roof, and almost immediately a dark shadow seemed to obstruct the flood of light that had entered it, and the figure of a man was clearly seen gazing with eager scrutiny on the immense space beneath him. Then, as his eye caught
Immense space beneath him. Scrutiny on the immense space beneath him.
Then, as his eye caught sight of him in the mantle, he grasped a floating mass of thickly matted boughs and glided down by their help with two... Oh my god, okay. He's grabbing palm fronds and gliding down on air. Cool.
Matted boughs and glided down. Mass of thickly matted boughs.
And glided down by their help to within 3 or 4 feet of the ground, and then leapt lightly on his feet. The man who had performed this daring act with so much indifference wore the transvestite costume. Okay.
Difference a transvestire costume.
"I beg your excellency pardon for keeping you waiting," said the man in the Roman dialect. "But I don't think my many minutes after my time 10 o'clock is just struck by the clock of St. John Lateran." Say not a word about Say not a word about being late.
Struck by the clock of St. John Lateran.
Say not a word of being late. Say not a word about being late.
Struck by the clock of St. John Lateran.
Say not a word about being late, replied the stranger in purest Tuscan. "'Tis I who am too soon. But even if you had caused me to wait a little while, I should have felt quite sure that the delay was not occasioned by any fault of yours." "Your excellency is perfectly right in thinking so," said the man. "I came here direct from the castle of St. Angelo, and I had an immense deal of trouble before I could get a chance to speak to Beppo." "And who is Beppo?" "Oh, Beppo is employed in the prison, and I give him so much a year to let me know what is going on within His Holiness's castle." "Indeed, you are a provident person, I say." "Why, you see, no one knows what may happen. Perhaps some of these days—"
Indeed, you are a provident person, I say.
"Why, you see, no one knows what may happen. Perhaps some of these days I may be entrapped, like poor Peppino, and may be very glad to have some little nibbling mouse to gnaw the meshes of my net, and so help me out of prison." "Briefly, what did you learn?" "That 2 executions of considerable interest will take place the day after tomorrow at 2 o'clock, as is customary at Rome at the commencement of all the great festivals. One of the culprits will be Mozzato. He is an atrocious villain, who murdered the priest who brought him up, and deserves not the smallest pity. The other—
The smallest pity.
Peppino.
Brought him up, and deserves not the smallest pity.
The other sufferer is sentenced to be decapitato, and he, your excellency, is poor Peppino. The fact is that you have not inspired... The fact is, he's going to say, well, the fact is you're a bad guy, and you bad guys are getting their heads chopped off. But here we go. Time we're looking at, okay, we go about 10 more minutes of this, and then we will call it a day.
And he, your excellency, is poor Peppino.
The fact is that you have inspired not only the pontifical government, but also the neighboring states with such extreme fear, that they are glad of all opportunity of making an example. But Peppino did not even belong to my band. He was merely a poor shepherd, whose only crime consisted in furnishing us with provisions. Which makes him your accomplice to all intents and purposes. But mark the distinction with which he is treated. Instead of being knocked on the head as you would be if once they caught hold of you, he is simply sentenced to be guillotined, by which means, too, the amusements of the day are diversified, and there is a spectacle to please every spectator. Without reckoning the wholly unexpected one, I am preparing to surprise them." "My good friends," said the man in the cloak, "excuse me for saying you seem to me precisely in the mood to commit some wild or extravagant act." "Perhaps I am, but one thing I have resolved on, and that is to stop at nothing to restore a poor devil to liberty, who has got into this scrape solely from having served me. I should hate and despise myself as a coward did I desert the brave fellow in his present extremity." "And what do you mean to do?" "To surround the scaffold with 20 of my best men, who at a signal from me, when I give my single," although it would be pretty funny because that's how some Italian might say it, but no, it's neither here nor there. Here we go.
And what do you mean to do?"
"To surround the scaffold with 20 of my best men, who at a signal from me will rush forward directly to Peppino, rush forward directly to Peppino? That doesn't make any sense. But directly as Peppino. Rush forward directly as Peppino's drop. Okay.
Will rush forward with 20 of my best men, who at a
Okay, we're going to try that again. And we're just changing a little bit of the dialogue here. Again, this is a translation of a translation of a translation. And it was pretty much stolen free off the internet, free royalties, so I can actually do this without getting in trouble. And sometimes the dialogue doesn't make sense or has been edited weirdly. And sometimes the transfer from the PDF to a word processing document cuts things weird. So when I find things that don't quite make sense, I feel perfectly fine going in and editing them directly as Peppino is brought for execution. Going in and editing them in order to make sure that it's clarity for the listener. Because if you don't know what I'm saying, then what is the point? And because it's a translation of a translation, it's not like I'm changing Shakespeare. I've changed Shakespeare before too, but it's neither here nor there. Here we go.
And what do you mean to do?
To surround the scaffold with 20 of my best men, who, at a signal from me, will rush forward directly as Peppino is brought for execution, and, by the assistance of their stilettos, drive back the guard and carry off the prisoner. That seems to me as hazardous as uncertain, and convinces me that my scheme is far better than yours. And what is your Excellency's project? Just this. I will so advantageously bestow 2,000 piastres that the person receiving them shall obtain a respite till next year for Peppino, and during that year another skillfully placed 1,000 piastres will afford him the means of escaping from his prison. And do you feel sure of succeeding? Excuse me, claimed the man in the cloak, suddenly expressing himself in French. What did your Excellency say? Inquired the other. I said, my good fellow, that I would do more single-handed by the means of gold than you and all your troop could effect with stilettos, pistols, carbines, and blunderbusses included. Leave me then to act and have no fears for the result. At least there can be no harm in myself and party being in readiness, in case your Excellency should fail. None whatever. Take what precautions you please, if it is any satisfaction to you to do so, but rely on my obtaining the reprieve I seek. Remember, the execution is fixed for the day after tomorrow, and that you have but one day to work it in. And what of that? Is not a day divided into 24 hours, each hour into 60 minutes, and every minute subdivided into 60 seconds? Now, in 86,400 seconds, very many things can be done. And how shall I know whether your Excellency has succeeded or not? Oh, that is very easily managed. I have engaged the 3 lower windows at the Café Rospoli. Should I have attained the... All right, we are at 9:40. Let's give it another 5 minutes. Oh,
that is very easily managed. And how shall I know whether your Excellency has succeeded or not?
Shoop-a-doop-a-doo.
Shall I know whether your Excellency has succeeded or not?
Oh, that is very easily managed. I have engaged the 3 lower windows at the Café Rospoli. Should I have obtained... This is what we do before breakfast. We should have had bigger breakfast, but it makes your belly grumble, so, it's give or take. Here we go.
I've engaged the 3 lower windows at the Café Rospoli.
Should I have obtained the requisite pardon for Peppino, the 2 outside windows will be hung with yellow damasks, and the center with white, having a large cross in red marked on it. And whom would you employ to carry the reprieve to the officer directing the execution? Send one of your men, disguised as a penitent friar, and I will give it to him. His dress will procure him the means of approaching the scaffold itself, and he will deliver the official order to the officer, who, in his turn, will hand it to the executioner. In the meantime, It will be as well to acquaint Peppino with what we have determined on, if it only be to prevent his dying of fear or losing his senses, because in either case a very useless expense will have been incurred." "Your Excellency," said the man, "you are fully persuaded of my entire devotion to you, are you not?" "Nay, I flatter myself that there can be no doubt of it. He is kind of a little bit of an arrogant bastard sometimes. Okay, here we go.
You are fully persuaded of my entire devotion to you, are you not?"
"No, I flatter myself that there can be no doubt of it," replied the cavalier in the cloak. "Well, then, only fulfill your promise of rescuing Peppino, and henceforward you shall receive not only devotion, but the most absolute obedience from myself and those under me that one human being can render to another." "Have a care how far you pledge yourself, my good friend, for I may remind you of your promise at some perhaps not very distant period, when I, in my turn, may require your aid and influence." "Let that day come sooner or later. Your Excellency will find me what I have found you in this very... Bleh. Sometimes you just forget what you're saying. You have no idea. The words do not make sense. So let's roll over that one more time. Let that day come sooner or later. Sooner than later. That makes a lot more sense. Sooner than later. Your Excellency will find in me what I have found you in this my heavy trouble. And if from the other end of the world you but write me word to do... find me what I have found you. As I have found you. I probably should have done this ahead of time, but I didn't.
May require your aid and influence.
Let that day come sooner rather than later, Your Excellency. You will find me as I have found you in this my heavy trouble. And if from the other end of the world you but write me word to do such or such a thing, you may regard it as done, for done it shall be, on the word and faith of... Hush, interrupted the stranger. I hear a noise. These some travelers who are visiting the Colosseum by torchlight. 'Twere better we should not be seen together. Those guides are nothing but spies, and might possibly recognize you. And, however I may be honored by your friendship, my worthy friend, if once the extent of our intimacy were known, I am sadly afraid both my reputation and credit would suffer thereby. Well, then, if you obtain the reprieve... The middle window at the Café Rospoli will be hung with the white damask, bearing a red cross. And if you fail, then all 3 windows will have yellow draperies. And then, my good fellow, use your daggers in any way you please, and I further promise you to be there as a spectator of your prowess. We understand each other perfectly, then. Adieu, Your Excellency. Depend upon me... Excuse me. That's a perfect time to end. We're going to take a little break, see if anybody's say hi. And then we will call it a morning not wasted. Here we go.
And I further promise you to be there as a spectator of your prowess.
We understand each other perfectly, then. Adieu, Your Excellency. Depend upon me as I firmly depend upon you. Cool. All right, that is a perfect time to stop, because we don't like to spend too much time in this little box or we start to suffocate and lose our brains. The rest of the day is going to be spent doing auditioning, so we are going to close, open you up, and it looks like we didn't have anybody paying attention, which is fine. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we are going to end the stream for today. Thank you for hanging out, or if you stopped by to visit, thank you for stopping by to visit.